NBA Courtside.
Follow-up slam, LeBron James. Got it! Derrick Rose!
Ran for three, and he hit it.
George is open. Oh, baby!
NBA Courtside. Here's Ben Heisler and Coach Nick Hauselman.
NBA Courtside, Episode 3. Welcome in. He's Coach Nick Hauselman. My name is Ben Heisler. Glad to have you on with us today. And we'll be joined by Mark Boyle, the radio play-by-play voice of the Indiana Pacers, coming up in segment 2. But, Coach, we are now in week 3 of NBA action. A lot of interesting teams, a lot of interesting stories, but I'm not sure if I've seen a more intriguing story so far this year than what the Pacers have done in 8-0.
Absolutely. I mean, we knew they had a defense to give them a nice solid base, and we were concerned about their offense. And, you know, there's a little bit of a scheduling benefit going on with some of the teams they've played. We haven't quite seen them have to really push it yet. So, you know, let's just see. But it certainly has been surprising.
It's been a little bit surprising, and I was taking a look through their schedule, and they've handed out pretty good victories for themselves. Only a couple games that have been by a margin of 5, and those were 2 road wins. If you talk about the game against the Pelicans on the 31st of October, and then also a 5-point win at Brooklyn on November 9th. So this is a team, and we'll talk with Mark about this, that maybe offensively they haven't gotten themselves going to the point where they'd like to be, but on the defensive end, they're tops in basketball right now as far as points per game. And
we knew that they were going to do that. We know that Coach Vogel adheres to a strict no-middle policy, which is the way to go, which what Coach Tom Thibodeau, the Bulls, really developed. And if you can rely on those solid fundamentals of how you don't help one pass away and force no middle, you're always going to have a good defensive scheme.
When you're trying to go against them, when you're trying to game plan against a defense like the Pacers defense, where they're so long and they're so athletic, and they can really pressure you when you get doubled up inside, how do you game plan for that? How do you break a lot of that pressure?
Well, you know, ball movement is always key, because if you try to attack into the teeth of the defense, it's playing right in their hands. And you also want to focus on penetrating to the middle. And I feel like sometimes guys will simply give up seeing the position of the ball defender, how he's really extremely forcing in baseline, and not try and jab step and get through. And the more times you can get into the middle, the more times that defense will break down and be vulnerable. So you have to stress that ball movement, high post, low post ball placement, and attacking into the middle.
I think they got a really tough test coming up on Chicago on Saturday, and they took care of the Bulls earlier last week when they played them on Wednesday night at home, and really just took the Bulls out of their offensive game. And we've talked about that on the last couple shows, their inability in the fourth quarter to get something out of their half-court offense. They're very good in transition, and Rose, and right now he's day-to-day with the injury, but he's still getting to the basket. He's still a little rusty, but they're not getting anything good out of their half-court sets. But what do you see against the Bulls coming up on Saturday? They got a Friday night game in Milwaukee, so it's going to be the second game of a back-to-back. Chicago's usually a better team at home. Is that the game you think coming up where finally their undefeated streak will come to an end?
I mean, certainly at the point of that coming up is one of the only games that look like it's going to be a threat to them. The Bulls will have some pride. They're not going to take that lightly, having been beaten by 17 the last time. So, you know, it's only a matter of time before Derrick Rose starts shooting 40%, right?
Ideally,
so,
yeah.
That's going to be an interesting battle for them. But I think that the Pacers benefited mostly from catching the Bulls at a vulnerable time for them in their season. But certainly, if you had to point to a game in the next week, that's the one that could give them a loss.
And you and I have talked about the Pacers before and how I think I'm a little bit more sold on them than you are. And you're looking at sort of their overall numbers. They're 23rd with around 95 points per game, so that number needs to come up. 10th in rebounds per game. They're 14th in assists with 22. And like I said before, they're first in the NBA as far as defensive points allowed. So when we look at them moving forward, you know, are you starting to come around a little bit more? I know you think that other than Paul George, they don't have a ton of guys that can really guard elite-level players. Their defense in general is good. But how sustainable do you think this team is?
Well, the defense is sustainable. They should be 1, 2, 3 for the rest of the year, without question. So what happens in the playoffs is that if you don't have an offense that can generate good shots, I'm not saying you have to make all of them or make 50%, but you have to have an offense that can consistently generate good shots for you on the road in a hostile environment in the playoffs. And that's really where they struggle when you're talking about conference finals and NBA finals. I'm not talking about getting out of the first round or even the second round. So that's where you're really going to be concerned with them is can a team that is so focused on defense and does so well in the half court, can a team still have enough focus and ability to then be creative enough on the offensive end to create those shots? And right now, that ain't going to cut it being 15th out of 30, dead average as an offensive team. They're going to have to move it up to, I would say, 10th before I would feel confident in thinking they have a shot at the NBA Finals.
So Indiana's sitting pretty at 8-0, and meanwhile, you take a look at the two teams out of New York with the Knicks and the Brooklyn Nets, and they're both at 2-4. And I think particularly with the Knicks, I think I expected a slow start from Brooklyn, and eventually they'd pick it up as the season went on. But the Knicks are a little bit more of a different story, and I'm a little bit concerned about their direction. I think they ultimately figure it out. There's too much talent on this team to not get something figured out. But when you look at both of these two squads, is the future for this season bright?
I don't think so for the Knicks. Now that Tyson Chandler is out, they really have no defensive backbone, and they didn't really have one before.
Right.
They simply had Tyson Chandler covering their ass every mistake they made. And so now they have to do some really creative is a nice word for what they have to do with their lineups. And it's very conceivable that after 20 games, they might win maybe 7 of those.
Yeah.
So then you have to look at this scenario of a 7-13 team for an owner that's convinced they're NBA title ready. I don't know if Woodson makes it out alive.
And there was actually a rumor that just popped up over on ESPN and with the New York Daily News. Frank Isola says that there's talks with the Nuggets that they might swap Kenneth Faried and Iman Shumpert. You like that potential move?
It's funny because, a lot of the people out there feel like Kenneth Faried isn't such a great defender. He's a good rebounder and really aggressive out there. I think he's a pretty good defender.
Yeah, I like him
think
too.
He would probably help, and it doesn't seem to be a trade that does much. It just sort of seems to be a trade for the sake of making a trade.
Right. Yeah, I thought about it for a second. I'm like, well, yeah, maybe he adds that little bit of rebounding help, and eventually when you get Chandler back, he's a nice piece to play and plug in and out with Stoudemire. But ultimately, you need a big, and I don't know whether there's a good place for them to go and find one at this point.
Yeah, I mean, nobody like Tyson Chandler really exists, and if they do, they're firmly ensconced on their team.
Correct.
And so they're not going to find a guy who is 6'11" who can really defend, and or at least it wouldn't be a total surprise. Like they grab somebody like a Steven Adams off the back of a bench and grab him and put him in. So yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. And again, Kenneth Faried is just another one of those forwards they're going to add to that team. And they already have a few of those.
What about Greg Monroe out in Detroit? There's been a lot of talks that Drummond's absolutely the guy moving forward, and you see the breakout potential that he has. And Monroe's a nice player, but there have been conversations that they're willing to move him. Do you think he could be a fit in New York?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Monroe could fit anywhere he goes. He's a nice complementary player, and he's got really good skilled moves in the post and can pass. Mm-hmm. That's not the worst fit for him in New York, but again, I think he's the kind of guy that could fit in a lot of different places. His defense isn't necessarily his strong suit either, but at least he would fit that more traditional role they're looking for right now as Tyson Chandler is out.
So there you go. There's a look at some of the top teams that have been struggling, particularly in the East. And also in Central Time Zone, Coach and I were watching the College Hoops Showcase on Tuesday night, and the big story is obviously with the top freshmen in Jabari Parker at Duke and Andrew Wiggins at Kansas, Julius Randle at UK. I was also looking at Gary Harris over at Michigan State because I really, really like his game. But, Coach, focusing on the 3 top freshmen, starting with Jabari Parker, I think he was probably the most impressive with his overall game last night.
Absolutely. I mean, I had seen him in the summer playing against other high schoolers, and he looked good. He had some skilled moves in the post, but I had no idea that he could handle the ball like that. I mean, It was a really impressive thing. He was passing on the perimeter. He was nailing threes and step backs and shooting them with confidence. So this guy is big time.
And with Wiggins, you and I were talking before about how the talent is obviously there, and the freakish athleticism is going to continue to develop. But if it were up to you, you'd like him to have another year out in college.
I think so. I think he needs to gain some weight. He goes to the basket, and a little bit of a bump will force him off balance. His footwork is not polished, and his release is a little funky, where he pronates his wrist to the left kind of violently. And I would almost reference Steve Blake does the same thing. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a problem if he needs to. He's going to need to shoot from the outside a little bit. Otherwise, you get into that Michael Kidd-Gilchrist thing where you can't consistently knock down a shot outside of 15 feet, and they'll just sag off of him.
Right, and Gilchrist has made some steps in the right direction this year, but I think another year playing for Calipari could have been immensely helpful. And listen, it's hard to turn down being the number 2 overall pick, but just a little bit more seasoning before he got to the NBA, I think could have done wonders for him. And then Julius Randle at UK, just an absolute monster. When I watched him play, I loved his ability as a young kid, putting his back to the basket, aggressively attacking, and had such a quick step to the basket, too. He was fearless. And Michigan State, coach, is a really, really good rebounding, very physical team in the Big Ten. And he just took the ball and was like, all right, I'm going in. Better watch out because you're not going to stop me. And they didn't.
Yeah, Tom Izzo is a guy who's been renowned for developing talent for the NBA, unlike other coaches that have won a lot in college and their players fizzle out. So he's in a great situation. And, in fact, we're talking about Michigan State and not Julius Randle is not playing for Michigan State. But let's just comment on that because that's a really great program. And all too often in some of these different coaches, and Bill Self could easily be included in that list, these guys will get to the pros and not end up playing as well as we had hoped.
That's true. It's true. And you sometimes wonder at what point when you're letting a lot of these guys just take the 1 year. And Coach K, who, of course, Duke played last night, not a particular fan of this whole tanking philosophy where if you're one of the bottom feeder teams, you're putting yourself in a position to get the best chance on getting the lottery. And basically he said, shame on whoever tanks in the NBA. And look, as a coach, someone who's been doing this for a long time at an elite level like Coach K, as a coach, it's easy to understand that mindset. You're trying to win every single game. Sometimes the big picture isn't always there. But my philosophy in looking at these teams is that they know that they're in rebuilding mode. And I talked to Jeff Goodman earlier today from ESPN, and basically we were talking about how GMs know that if you're in the middle of the pack, coach, if you know that you're going to be like that 13 through 18 team where you're just at the tail end of the lottery, you're going to get bounced in the first round, and you're stuck there. Like, if you're the Milwaukee Bucks, you're going to be stuck for a long time. There's a problem on getting that team back to where it needs to be at an elite level if you're trying to build through the draft. If you're a small market team in particular, you need to be able to get a top lottery pick. And even though Coach wants every team to try and win every single game every season, the fact of the matter is that there's going to be rebuilding years. And for a lot of these teams, they know with the talent in this draft, they need to do that this year.
Absolutely. I think when you're talking about coaching, especially at the NBA level, to me, it's more about the process. The result is something you can't often control. Like Popovich is a good example in the finals.
Right.
But they got the shots they needed. They were in the right positions to execute what they needed to do, and that's all you can ask for as a coach. And so I think that this tanking notion doesn't have to be a thing where they're trying to lose every game, because what Coach K is talking about is you sacrifice the culture that you're trying to build. And so someone like Brad Stevens is trying to build a culture that's based on hard work and intelligent basketball. You can do all those things and still end up losing a lot of games because of the talent that they have, but you still don't lose sight of what the process is. And I think what they're learning is that some of that culture is already permeated so well in certain places where, like Philly and the Suns, they're winning these games.
Is that a hard message to send to a team saying, look, we know we're not a playoff team this year, and just flat out, step? Because I feel like if you're going to say that to a team, it has to be sort of the right way to say that message. I don't think you say, we're going to go to the championship this year when you know that the talent level on your team isn't there. I think it's okay to sort of have that type of communication with your squad saying, look, we're at a point where we know we need to get better. And that's okay, because by the time we do get better, then we'll be able to achieve our ultimate goal. But what's that message like when you're a coach saying, we need to get better. We may not be the best team right now, but maybe we can get there?
I mean, there's something to be said for being pragmatic, but I can guarantee you no one's ever going to say we need to lose these games so we can get that top pick. That's not even ever going to be said out loud to the team. even maybe in the dog days of the season in March when they've only won 10 games, or like when Charlotte did that, I'm sure it was clear to those people, to those players, but that's the thing is, language is important and the power of words, and so you're never going to get like a coach to actually come flat out and say that. And so that's the thing that they're going to focus on. I've been around NBA players before. We talked about trades that appear to go in that direction where they want to, get a little bit worse and get a better position. And they would adamantly refuse that that's even a possibility, that trade is not going to happen. And sure enough, 2 days later it happens and they end up getting in that situation. So I think that there's a definite disconnect between the players even wanting to let that into their heads.
I think that's fair too. It's hard because you're dealing with a lot of young players, guys that are very impressionable athletes, and to have that type of message, it can be tough. All right, before we get to Mark Boyle, it's time for our top 5 of the week, and this week we're breaking down impact rookies. So I'm going to give you my 5 picks, Coach. I think, I don't want to predict anything, but I think we're going to be around the same area code here. So let me know. I'm going to start with number 5. Nate Walter's been a nice little player over with Milwaukee. Brandon Knight's been hurt, and he's stepped in, and he's been averaging around 6 assists per game when he's gotten the opportunity to play. When you look at him so far, and obviously I think when Knight comes back, his numbers are going to go down just because they need Knight to continue to develop. But Walters, I think for a late-round pick, has been an impressive player.
Yeah, if you look at his per 36 numbers, they're actually pretty good. 10 points and 6.5 assists a game. And I had to say I'm going to drop a name here, which since we're already talking about him, it's okay. But I went to dinner with a guy during the summer league, and I thought he was way too nice of a kid to be able to make an impact in the league of a bunch of grown-ups who are going to beat him up and take his lunch money. But he's actually a lot more resilient than he appears.
Another guy with a really, really nice per rating is Steven Adams over in Oklahoma City. And, he's still going to have those up and down games, but I think right now he's the best rebounder on that team. And I know Serge Ibaka is there, but Ibaka does a lot of other things very well. But Adams, when he gets into the post, can rebound the hell out of the basketball. And someone who I think he's going to continue to grow as far as getting points in the paint. His field goal percentage so far is nice at 52%. But I like the upside on Adams, and I wasn't sold on him initially coming into the draft. But the more I watch him play, the more I'm starting to like him.
Yeah, his skill level was low, and they were drafting him on potential. But I got to tell you, start the drumbeat now, Ben. Let's get him starting in front of Perkins because I can't stand watching Perkins play anymore. I'm not even sure anybody in OKC wants to watch him play anymore. And this guy could give you a double-double if you give him a good 33, 34 minutes a game.
And I missed the opportunity to pick him up in my fantasy league, too, and I'm kicking myself for it. I missed both the opportunity to grab Olynyk, and I had Adams, and I had Favarini for a while, and I thought I was a genius in the league. And then, of course, Brad Stevens comes out and says, Victor probably prefers to come off the bench. And then I'm like, oh, no, that's the kiss of death.
Olynyk will be valuable to you soon. And I guess you're not watching their effing fantasy show because we did a spotlight on Steven Adams.
I know. I missed it. I feel terrible about it. But Olynyk is actually number 3 on my list. And it's nice to see him after sort of a rough start to the season with Favarini being able to start ahead of him. And he sort of took that to heart and been playing really, really well as of late and getting the field goal percentage back up and rebounding the basketball well. There's a lot of things that he does well. And I also think he's a very good passing center as well.
Absolutely. He's got a lot of skill. He is in the absolute perfect position and team with Brad Stevens to thrive in either if it's eventually or if it's this year.
He's such a Brad Stevens player. You're right.
He's a really good talent for a long time.
He's such a Brad Stevens player. Sometimes I keep forgetting that Olynyk and Stevens, it's like they're meant to be. There's something special that's going to be happening over there. If he didn't end up in Gonzaga, Olynyk would have been a Butler guy. Don't you think?
Right, and I think it's like as Pop is to Tim Duncan, Brad Stevens could very well be to Olynyk.
Oh man, now you're reaching. Now you're reaching if they get to that level.
As him, I think that relationship and that symbiosis could be the same.
That's true. No, that I understand. My number 2 impact rookie of the season so far is Victor Oladipo, and this isn't a surprise here. He's been getting a lot of minutes, averaging right now around 26 per game. I'd like to see his field goal percentage come up a little bit. Right now he's shooting just around 41%. But I love his intensity on the defensive level, his work ethic. continues to inspire his teammates in Orlando. And I think by the time things are all said and done, I think his points per game are going to come up a little bit too. Because right now he's still playing a position he's not super comfortable with, playing the 1, but he is dishing out the ball around 3.1 assists per game. He's rebounding the basketball. He's getting a lot of steals. So this is a guy that we saw the skill set coming in. A lot of scouts raved about how athletic he was and his work ethic, and this is a player that will just continue to get better.
Absolutely. They have a nice team going on down there with the Flaulo and Vucevic and him. And I was blown away by how good his ball handling got or is, because I didn't see it that much in Indiana. And so to see him come in there, handle the ball real well, the jump shot is not there. There's some mechanics he's going to have to fix over the summer. It can't happen now. And if he can do that, then he'll be a nice explosive guard that can really play defense and probably be more of a combo as he gets older and fully gets more experience.
And in episode 2, we talked about Michael Carter-Williams and really his explosive start to the season. And he's come down to earth a little bit, but his points per game are still tops among rookies at 17.4. Still getting a lot of boards and 7.5 assists per game, still 2.5 steals per game. But this is someone who's getting a ton of playing time. And right now, as long as he continues to sort of slide along and make impact plays, I think you're looking at Michael Carter-Williams down the road as the Rookie of the Year.
Who knew? But absolutely.
Right.
He's got long arms. Here's what you should watch for when you watch him play. All the scoring is nice and the assists. What blows me away most, and as we coach these days, we don't do much sliding because sliding is too slow. You have to turn and run because guys are so fast with the ball. But you watch him slide laterally. I don't think I've seen a guy slide laterally that quickly before, and it's a very ironic touch because he played zone in college,
right.
But still, this guy's got some serious lateral quickness, and that's really going to help him in his career on defense.
Well, they knew that he was going to be a good defender, and his ability to slide, and he's got such long arms and can sort of hang with everybody, being 6'7" at the point guard position. You know, it'll be fun to watch him D up on a lot of these top point guards all over the league because he's going to be able to stay with them.
I mean, I think it was weird. At one point, the point guard position was the premier position in the NBA a few years ago, and then it kind of went through a lull. We had some injuries, Rose and Rondo. But when he joins the Knicks and really gets good, then all of a sudden it's another resurgence with Oladipo if he continues to develop. So we're really going to see some really good young point guards coming through.
So once again, my top 5 of the week for impact rookies, I'm going with Nate Walters, Steven Adams, Kelly Olynyk, Victor Oladipo at number 2, and then Michael Carter-Williams at number 1. So not much of a debate from you, Coach, today.
I'm sorry, not much of a
debate.
I agree.
Not much of a debate from you today. I feel good about this.
I'm not going to go after you on those.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, next week I got to do something much more challenging. Something where you're going to be like, you're 100% wrong.
Exactly. No, that would be fun. That's explosive radio right there.
There you go. That's what we need, a little explosive podcast. And speaking of explosiveness, Paul George off to another terrific start for the 8-0 Pacers. Their play-by-play voice, Mark Boyle, is coming up next. Don't go anywhere. This is Courtside. Very excited here in NBA Courtside to bring in our guest today. He's entering his 23rd season as the voice of the Indiana Pacers. And please do yourself a favor. Follow him on Twitter at Mark_J_Boyle, B-O-Y-L-E. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
We're good. Thanks so much for popping on with us. And I suppose to lead things off, entering the season, what were your expectations of this team? And are you as surprised as most that they remained the lone undefeated team at this point?
Well, I don't know whether I'm surprised or not they're undefeated. You can never predict those kinds of things, how teams will get out of the gate and so forth. But I'm certainly not surprised they're being considered one of the better teams in the NBA. I anticipated coming into the season that they'd make a serious run at the championship. And while we don't know how things will look in May and June, it's certainly reasonable to expect, I think, with this roster, that they can at least compete with Miami, Chicago, San Antonio, and whoever else is out there come May or June. So you never know that you're going to start as successful as they have. So I suppose on some level that's a little bit surprising, but it's not at all surprising that they're among the elite teams.
Hey, Mark, it's Coach Nick here, and I was wondering if you can comment on the fact that Coach Vogel took over in an interesting circumstance. What do you think exactly is it about him that the players respond to?
Well, he knows what he's doing, and that's always one. And then there's 1A, 1B, and so forth after that. So he knows what he's doing. He knows how to coach a basketball team. And his demeanor is very compatible with this group of guys. He was very much aided by the fact that his personality is much different than Jim O'Brien's was. Now, Jim was the coach when Frank took over, and Jim was old school, and he was a little bit more negative and a little bit more abrasive, I think, than many of the players cared for. So when Frank came in, A, it's his personality not to be that way, and B, I think he made a conscious effort to be a little bit more player-friendly, which is not to say he's a pushover or doesn't demand things from the players, but his methods were different than Jim's were, and that's worn well with this group of guys. And then you take that into account, and then over the last 3+ seasons, management has gradually upgraded the roster, and the younger players that were in place have gotten better. And so Frank has benefited from circumstances, but he's also a very good coach, and I think his demeanor is ideally suited for this group of guys.
Their defense has been remarkable, and that's always been a statement of his coaching style. And you look at this year, only allowing 84.5 points per game, which is tops in the NBA. Like I said before, defense has always been a Frank Vogel statement, but I think that's been one of the more impressive things I've seen from them this year is their ability to defend both in the interior post and along the wing, and I think even take it to another step in the right direction this year.
Agreed. They were elite in that area last year, and you could make the case that they were the best defensive team in the league last season. If they weren't, they were certainly in the conversation. And they've got many of the same people back. You've got Hibbert protecting the rim. You've got George defending out on the perimeter. And so while there are some individuals there that aren't great defensively, the team concept is very sound. You have enough good individual defenders to make it work, and they're all tied together. Defense is their priority here. And it has been. Last year, their whole success was based on defense and rebounding. Now, they're not rebounding quite as well as they were last year, but they're defending even better. And as Paul George improves and Lance Stevenson improves, now they've got something going on the offensive end, too. They're going to be, assuming they can stay healthy, and particularly if Danny Granger can come back at any kind of a contributory level at all, they are going to be very difficult to beat in the spring.
You know, there's no question they've built the defense-first mentality, which has allowed them to win these games. Their offense is still puddling along, not so great as far as their ranking in the NBA. So the question I have for you is, A, do you think that they can improve significantly, and how far do they have to improve to seriously contend for an NBA title?
Well, the first part of that is, yes, I think they can improve. I don't know how significantly. And the second part is, I don't know. You know, you're great defensively. How good do you have to be offensively? I suppose that varies on a night-to-night basis or a series-to-series basis if you're talking about the playoffs. But I do know this. They have had nights this season. They've played 8 games, and they've had nights where they turned the ball over too many times, where they shot for low percentage, where they made errors in judgment, and they've survived all of those in large part because their defense is so good. So generally speaking, I think they can win a high percentage of games even if the offense doesn't get any better. Now, if it does get better, then they're obviously even better positioned. And if it gets appreciably better, then I don't know how anybody's going to beat them because their defense is so good.
Mark, when you watch Paul George play and watch him continue to blossom both at the offensive and defensive level, and I look at him as the second best perimeter defender in the NBA, what impresses you the most when you watch him play?
Well, several things. He's getting better, which is the most impressive thing. He's not satisfied. Well, go back a couple of years. He wasn't satisfied with being in the NBA, and then as he emerged as a contributing player, he wasn't satisfied with that. When he emerged as a good player, he wasn't satisfied with that. Now he's an excellent player, and he's not satisfied with that. So he's always striving to get better. He's a very hard worker. Mm-hmm. He understands what it takes to succeed at this level, and he's only 22 years old. So he will get better. I don't know what his ceiling is. I'm not going to say that he can be the next Kobe Bryant or the next whomever. I think being Paul George is good enough for him, and how good that is remains to be seen. He's already an exceptional defender. He's become a pretty good shooter from three-point range and in. He can get to the rim. And just watch him play this year and compare it to how he played in previous seasons. Last year when he was out there, you could see that he felt like he belonged and he was comfortable. And he was fine. But now watch him this year. From the opening tip, it's clear that he thinks the game belongs to him. He has seized things with a much, much greater level of confidence, of swagger, even arrogance on occasion, and I think that bodes well for him. He is an elite talent, and he's a hard worker, and when you put those things together, it's not too difficult to see why he's so good. It is difficult to imagine, though, how good he might get. Even if this is as good as he gets, it's pretty good. I think he'll get better, because he's gotten better every year he's been in the league, and he's committed to being the best. So it's hard to say how good he'll be, but it wouldn't surprise me if, say, in 2 to 3 years he was one of the top 4 or 5 players in the league.
Mark, what is your observation of him as a leader of the team and also his relationship with Coach Vogel?
Well, he's become more assertive as he's gotten older. He's not one of these rah-rah, in-your-face type of guys, but he's not afraid to speak up. He's very encouraging to his teammates. He's very inclusive. He's not one of these aloof stars who thinks the game's all about him. He goes out of his way to integrate himself within the group, and he's not afraid to say something if it needs to be said. That's something that's still evolving as he becomes a better player, a more prominent part of the mix, and older, and I think you'll see that become even more of a part of his personality as he gets a little bit older. But right now, for a guy his age, at his level of experience, he's a solid leadership type guy, and they've got guys like that on this team. David West is tremendous in that area. Paul is coming along as a younger player. Hibbert's a vocal guy. George Hill is a solid presence out there. It's a team that's been constructed not just based on talent, but based on how the personalities might fit together, based on the long run, based on shared commitment and shared goals. Management has really done an excellent job of putting together not just a good team, but a team that fits together with its personalities and talents.
Mark, I really like watching Lance Stevenson play, and he had a phenomenal game last time out with the triple-double. There's a lot of things that I don't know if he does it at an elite level, but certainly that he does very well. When you break down his game, what do you think is one area of his game you'd like to see him improve on?
Well, the one area we thought we needed to see him improve on specific to skill in the offseason was shooting. And 8 games in, I'm not going to say he's conquered that, but he's over 50% from three-point range. He looks confident when he shoots the ball, which he never did before. So I think there's reason to be optimistic that he'll make great gains there. The other thing with him, and this is the same thing that almost every young player has to go through because it's really difficult, it's not about talent, it's about consistency. Now, he has talent. In my estimation, he's the second most talented player on the team. And that's just one opinion, but I think if you took a consensus of those around, you'd find that he's very highly regarded in this mix in terms of his talent and how it compares to the other guys in the team. But consistency has been an issue with him. He's disappeared for periods of time in the past, and then he'll have an excellent game, and then he'll have a decent game, and then he'll disappear again. He's not been consistent. But this season, you see little things that show you maybe that's coming. For example, in one of the wins earlier this season, he started 0 of 7 from the floor, and the old Lance would have disappeared, would have mentally checked out, maybe would have even done something detrimental to lead to a defeat. But this guy kept between the lines, stayed focused, didn't let the 0 of 7 get to him, and made a lot of big plays in the fourth quarter, and the Pacers were able to help or use those plays to help themselves to a victory. So he's become more professional, more consistent. His shooting appears to be better. He's got great physical talent. He's very strong for a guard. He's a good rebounder. He sees the floor beautifully. And he's getting better all of the time, too. So, you talk about the weakness last year, which was the bench, and they've upgraded that, and that's gotten the main share of the attention. But the younger guys who are not at their ceiling yet, guys like George and Stevenson, have also gotten noticeably better, and that's another reason that they've become a better team.
Mark, we spotlighted last night Lance Stevenson getting a taunting violation, which is some of the things we have problems with when we watch the Pacers play as far as decision-making and sort of the mental approach to the game. So my question is, he seems to have improved. Is this something that the coaching staff is working on and is always attentive to help him? Mature might not be the perfect word, but to help him take it to the next level?
Well, they understand his deficiencies, and he understands his own deficiencies, and they've worked with him on that. Brian Shaw, who is now the coach in Denver, was here previous to this season, and he worked with Lance on that. Larry Bird has talked to Lance about that. But it's a fine line because Lance's game, to a degree, is based on emotion, is based on competitive spirit, and sometimes he has difficulty reining himself in. The other night when he got that taunting technical was an example of that in the Memphis game. But generally, he's gotten better. His maturity level has increased. He handles himself much more professionally. But there will probably be more of those because he's still prone to the occasional head-scratching type of play. And emotion being such a big part of his game, it wouldn't surprise me if that happened again. But they do work with him on it. He's aware of it. And he's made gains in that area, I think.
And one key thing for me, too, and again, we're talking with Mark Boyle, the radio play-by-play voice of the Indiana Pacers here on NBA Courtside. The depth on the bench with this team this year compared to with other years with Scola and Watson, Johnson, Sloan, the impact of having those types of guys where they can give you anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes a night versus last year's rotation, that's got to be a big step up for this team when you're looking at contending for an NBA championship.
Well, it's important. You have to have people that can come in there and at the very least allow your starters to rest without giving back leads. And that was a problem last season. The starting five, by any reasonable measure, statistical or otherwise, was one of the best in the league, but the bench, by those same standards, was one of the worst. So they realized they had to upgrade, and I think time will tell whether that's the case. The bench hasn't been as good early as we thought it might be, but it's still been better than it was last year, and it will get better as these guys adapt to the situation. Almost all of the guys now coming off of that bench were somewhere else last year, because you've got the guys you mentioned. You've got Watson, you've got Scola, and then Orlando Johnson was here but played a relatively minor role last season. They brought in Chris Copeland from the Knicks, who so far hasn't been able to find a spot on the rotation. It's coming. Those guys are better than the guys they replaced. I don't know if by the end of the season they would be regarded as an elite bench, but with the starters so strong, and we haven't even seen Granger in the mix yet, he'll probably come off the bench when he comes back. That will add to the bench power, the bench punch. It'll certainly be good enough to help them get to where they want to go. It doesn't need to be great. The starting lineup is very good, but it does need to be better than serviceable, and it will be, I think, better than serviceable if it's not already.
Has the coaching staff talked at all about the new guys coming in and trying to master the defensive fundamentals they run on the Pacers, or has that been an easy transition for them? Have they talked about that?
Well, I think it's been a pretty easy transition. The guys we're talking about are pros. They've been around for a while. Scola has been in Houston and Phoenix. Watson was with Golden State and Chicago and Brooklyn. Orlando Johnson was already here, so no adjustment for him. It's always going to take a little bit of time to get comfortable with a new system, whether it's a new coaching staff or a new offensive philosophy or new defensive schemes or whatever. But these are smart guys who are experienced, who have seen most everything the NBA has to offer. And I think the numbers and the performances speak for themselves. Defensively, you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody who could put together a better 8-game run defensively than this team has. So I think it's fair to say that everybody has grasped the fundamentals or the concepts of what they're trying to do defensively and is executing them very well.
Mark, we have a couple Twitter questions that were sent over to us with the hashtag CourtsideQs, so I'll give them to you both. The first one is from J. Herman 46260, and he's curious to know what Danny Granger's role is going to be and whether or not when he comes back will it upset chemistry. And then at Sam GV wants to know, and this is something that we were actually sort of talking about before we went on, is this team the best NBA Pacers that you've seen, which includes 95, 98, 2000, and 2005?
Well, let's take the first one first, the Granger situation. He has begun practicing, and they're hoping that he returns in the short term. Now, whether that's a week or 3 days or 8 days, I don't know, but they do anticipate that he'll be back. So when he comes back, his role to a degree will be dictated by any kind of minute limitations he has. But as far as his role is concerned, I think the way Stevenson's playing, it's almost a guarantee that he'll begin coming off of the bench. And we'll see how that plays out. Now, he's an older player who has had his statistical day in the sun. He led the team in scoring 5 straight years before missing almost all of last season. And he's to the point in his career where I think a championship is probably number one on his list of priorities. On the other hand, he's human, and his role is different. He's not the star anymore, and he's in the last year of the contract playing for another one. So those are things that have to be factored in when you try to analyze how he might come back. I think that he'll be fine, and I think there'll be a relatively painless adjustment because he has played with the majority of these guys, even though his role will be different. But to a degree, how he's used is going to depend on his health. Now, this current injury is not related to his knee surgery, but it's been a nagging calf injury. He's an older player with considerable mileage on the body now, so we'll see. Ideally, if he could come back and give them some really good minutes off of the bench by the time we get to the spring and provide another legitimate scorer and a veteran presence who's been through the playoffs before, then I think they'd be happy with that. As far as comparing this group to any of the other groups, to me that's premature. This group has gotten better in each of the last few seasons, but there are new guys here, and I'm not inclined to compare them to anybody 8 games in. I will say this, in my time here, the best team we've had, I think, and I'd be curious as to whether you guys agree, was the 98 team that lost to Chicago in the Eastern Conference Finals. Now, we've had 6 teams that have gotten to the conference finals and one that has gotten to the NBA Finals during my time. So we did have at least one team that achieved more than the 98 team did, but I thought that 98 team was exceptional, and I won't go so far as to say they had Chicago beaten in Game 7 in Chicago back in 98, but they had a 5-point lead with about 3 minutes to go in Game 7 and couldn't hold, and we know how good that Chicago team was. So until proven otherwise, my favorite is that 98 team.
I would agree with you, Mark. I think the 98 team was probably the most talented of the bunch. I think the 95 team was the more entertaining of the bunch. What do you think, Coach?
98, did they have both Davis brothers at that point?
Yep, sure did.
Okay, so that's for sure. When you have those two guys on your team, then that puts them above anybody else I've seen from the Pacers in those years, for sure.
I will say this, though, Ben, I do disagree with you on this. In my time, the most talented team we had here, and in my view, without question at all, was the 04-05 team, the Brawl team. That team was exceptionally talented, but they weren't mature. They didn't have a professional demeanor. They lacked leadership, and so they imploded. If it hadn't been the Brawl, I think it would have been something else. But from a pure talent standpoint, I think that is easily the best team the Pacers have had in my time.
Well, Mark, now that you bring that up, that was something that David Stern was actually recently reflecting on, talking about the Malice at the Palace, and said it was the toughest crisis that he's ever dealt with. When you think back on that night, what do you remember most about it?
Well, it was so surreal, and it all happened right in front of where we were doing our broadcast that night.
Sure.
And, what I remember about it most was fracturing my vertebrae in 5 places. That's a little hard to forget. So that would be my biggest memory of it. But beyond that, in the aftermath of it, in the locker room after the game and on the bus and on the plane, I look back on it now, and in retrospect, I'm amazed that none of us, and I include myself, none of us had any clue as to the impact that would have, not just on this franchise, but on the entire NBA and perhaps to a lesser degree professional sports in general, with the dynamic between fans and players and all of that. We certainly didn't expect Ron Artest to be suspended for the season or any of the other penalties that were handed out. And I'm not saying I don't think they were fair. I'm just saying that there was no precedent for it. And so we were surprised by it. We had no idea that it would ruin the season. We all thought, well, Ronnie will be down for 10 or 15 games. And, we were only, I think, 9 games into the season then. So Ronnie's down for 15. Now we're 25, 26, 27 games in, whatever his suspension would be. 55 more games to get the act together. And, we'll be operating on all cylinders getting to the playoffs. Well, it never happened, and everybody knows what happened after that. And it took the franchise a long time to get back to where it had been previously. So the thing I remember about it is that it was so surreal, and that nobody had any idea how it would impact not just the Pacers, but really the entire professional sports scene. It
was a remarkable night, and just thinking back, I think I was in high school. It was 2004, right?
It was November of 2004, right?
Yeah, it was absolutely surreal, and it's nice to see where this team has come over the last several years, and to get back into major contention again, and now contending for an NBA championship. Please follow Mark on Twitter at Mark_J_Boyle. He is the voice of the Pacers, and we were very thankful to have you on the show. Mark, thanks so much for your time. Really enjoyed it.
All right, my pleasure, Ben. Thanks, Coach.
There you go. That is Mark Boyle. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back here on NBA Courtside. Don't go anywhere. Our thanks to the voice of the Indiana Pacers, Mark Boyle, for hopping on with us here today on Courtside. As we wrap it up, as we do every week, Coach, it's time for the 3-man weave.
Well, let's break right into it. I'm going to spotlight 3 games as my 3-man weave this week.
Okay.
So, Thursday evening, we have the Warriors versus OKC, 2 top Western Conference teams. The Warriors are going to go up against a better defense in OKC. We'll see just how Russ and Steph go at each other and all the other guys. That should be an exciting game. The next weave is, as we pitch over to the middle, would be Friday evening, the Mavericks versus the Heat, a little rematch of the finals from a couple of years ago. Surprisingly, the Mavericks have been playing pretty well, and Monte Ellis is going to be a real key here. And as I thought before the season started, now he's on a team with some quality offensive players, he looked a lot better and getting back to what we had seen at his best with the Warriors. So we move on to our final pitch for the layup on the three-man weave, which is going to be Bulls-Pacers on Saturday, the grudge match, a rematch for the Bulls after getting hammered by the Pacers. Will Derrick Rose get back into the swing of things against the staunchest defense in the league this year? It should be an epic drag-out, knockdown kind of fight, just like the Midwest people that I grew up with like to see.
What do you think the over-under of that game is going to be? I would say 165.
Oh, I would say under.
Yeah, you think so? So it'll be like, what, 81,
like
75?
81 to 80.
Wow. That's just typical Bulls-Pacers, though, at some point. It's whatever team really wants to score, they might try, but they probably won't get there.
Oh, yeah, and Thibodeau is in late season form from the bench, barking out his orders. It's really startling. I don't remember hearing him do that so early in the season of barking out ice and barking out rotate and barking out go. And he's got him grinding to the metal right now.
This is the second time that you've had the Bulls on the three-man weave. You thought that Rose was going to break out against the Jazz on Friday. He had a better game, and the Bulls in general probably played their most complete game. And then as far as our final segment, We Own the Week, we're going to take a look at which NBA team is going to have the best week ahead. Normally we tape this on a Monday. So I don't know if it's necessarily cheating a little bit, Coach, to do this on a Wednesday because the week has already begun. But you and I both agree for the second straight week, the San Antonio Spurs, probably the team that's going to have the most success. They got a game out at Washington tonight. We're taping this on a Wednesday. And then at Utah on Friday. Utah is very, very bad. And that will end the week, and they had a nice win on Monday against Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm. And then don't forget, they're going to play Boston coming up at the end on the next Wednesday. So for this fiscal week, if we're talking about it, that's a nice run of 3 games that will be easy for them.
Okay, so we're going to do it via fiscal week. Then that's actually a better idea. All right, so then absolutely now we're totally fine. We're not cheating. The San Antonio Spurs for the second straight week. And you know what? We did good last week too, Coach, because they had 4 games. They had 1 loss at Denver, but then 3 straight wins against Phoenix, Golden State, and the New York Knicks. So I think we can take the Spurs for a second straight week without a problem.
I mean, the way they dismantled the Knicks, it was a bit embarrassing for the Knicks. I think that they shouldn't have a problem. But you know what? This is the NBA. Wacky things happen, and you never know. But I put my money on the Spurs.
So there you go. We will be back hopefully next Monday with a possible surprise guest along the way. But for Coach Nick, my name is Ben. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing NBA Courtside. And Coach, leave him with something.
No flipping.
There you go. We'll talk to you next week.